Each year, the Week of Prayer of Christian Unity is celebrated from January 18th through January 25th. I talked with the Reverend Francis X. Mazur, Ecumenical Officer for the Diocese of Buffalo, about the history of ecumenism, the Week of Prayer for Christian Unity, and ecumenism today. Very pleased to welcome my good friend, Father Butch Mazur, who is Ecumenical Officer for the Diocese of Buffalo. Hi, Butch.
I'm glad to join you again, Stan.
And you have a long history of working interreligiously and ecumenically.
I've been working ecumenically and interreligiously for 40 years here in the Roman Catholic Diocese of Buffalo. It's been a long journey. And in that journey, of course, established many great relationships with the religious people of Buffalo and Western New York.
And we worked together for about 30 years.
That's right, 30
Time
years.
really moves along, doesn't it?
It does.
Well, let me begin this. As you know, Butch, the history of the Christianity is one of divisions and attempted reconciliation. I mean, there was the Great Schism, which was in 1054 with the Catholic Church and the Eastern Church. And then in 1517, Martin Luther, again, nailed his thesis to the door, which caused the Protestant Reformation.
That's right, and it's interesting because when I encounter people from other than Christian religions, they'll say, well, aren't you all together? Aren't you all one? Don't you believe in the same thing? And we say, well, some of the stuff we believe in the same thing, but over a period of history and times, people developed, people changed, and went down their own path.
And attempts to bring them together is the ongoing process. Well, the kind of modern ecumenical movement got its impotence from right here in Western New York, where they had the Second Great Awakening. That was the revivals that went on. You remember Finney, who was the evangelist, was a Presbyterian, I believe, at that point. But it really built a number of people and got them active. And they were concerned with evangelizing, but also social concerns and worried about justice. I mean, that led to a lot of involvement in the anti-slavery movement. So all of this came together and led to the extension of Christianity and so forth. Well, as we got to the end of the 18th century and into the 19th century, they began to find ways needing to get people to begin to work together because there were all these divisions in the missionary field. So they began to have these missionary conferences. And indirectly, that's how our own Church Women United, which is in this area, started. They began concerned about the social needs growing out of industrialization. And that began a faith and order, began to work, and concern for world peace, particularly before the First World War. All of these began to play, and it led to what we call life and work, kind of the start of ecumenical efforts. And, people say, well, we may not believe the same things, but we can do things together. And there was this great conference in 1925, and the theme was Doctrine Divides, Service Unites. But the other piece was the faith and order. And that has a lot to do with dialogue about issues of faith and concern. But this was kind of the movement that was going on. But there was another stimulus that occurred that you're going to tell us about that led to the Week of Prayer of Christian Unity.
Yeah, there was and he was called then an Anglican priest, and things have even changed with that usage of the word.
Right outside of New York City.
Right. Father Paul Watson, who was an Anglican priest, converted to Roman Catholicism, and he began a religious order of priests called the Friars of the Atonement. They followed the Franciscan rule. And Father Paul Watson said, we need to come together as a Christian people to pray. And he, along with another Anglican colleague, established the octave, what's called the octave of Christian unity. On the Christian calendar during that octave, both the feast day of St. Peter and St. Paul occurs on the Christian calendar. So that's how they decided on the octave during the month of January.
Now, that was picked up at what point by the Greymoor?
Almost immediately, right at the
And
very...
what are they?
The Greymoors are a Franciscan order, follow the rule of St. Francis. They're located in Garrison, New York, and they have an ecumenical and interreligious institute. The interreligious institute has been added on just in recent times, but their whole thrust was with a theme that they used, that they all may be one, that they all may be one, meaning Christians. So they established this prayer week.
And which was the prayer from the Gospel of John.
Correct.
That they might all be one.
Yes, correct. So each year there is a different theme. This year the theme is They Are Friends Among Us, based on some quotations from the Acts of the Apostles. So here locally, and as I always say, ecumenism and interreligious work is all local. There are different ministerial groups, as we refer to them, groups of churches, Christian churches that are in different towns and villages. Some of them celebrate that during
Prayer Christian Unity.
Correct. Some
which
celebrate
is
it
January 18th to
to
25th.
25th. Some celebrate it though at Pentecost time too, especially if you're in the southern tier with winter. They do so. Pentecost is a feast day after Easter, and they celebrate it then. So the Greymoors, who actually come up with the whole prayer form, it's all done with symbols and prayers, and everything is done. They don't say you have to do it in January. Do it when it's convenient for you.
But they have groups in different parts of the world write these services.
Correct, and they gathered together. Last year, they gathered together in Malta, different ecumenical leaders from the different Christian denominations, and that's how they develop the prayer service.
Now, this is officially supported by the Catholic Church and by the Vatican?
Correct. It's officially supported by not only the Catholic Church, but the Episcopal Church, the Lutherans, United Church of Christ, all of them coming together saying we support this effort where we should pray and try to put our differences aside.
Well, for a long time, the Catholic Church was not involved in the pure ecumenical movement because they were saying, you know, we are the church, come home.
Yeah, it wasn't until really Vatican II, 50 years ago, 51 years ago.
Oh my gosh, 50 years.
Time goes by. People will still, or the old timers will say, we were taught never to go into the Protestant church, you know, because they are different. They're not like us. They're against us. They even use that kind of phrase.
But there was a period back in the 1920s and forward, all the way to Vatican II, where some of the papers wouldn't even take ads from Catholic churches. So there was this social division as well.
Yeah, you can tell the division. Even here's a little key to you. You can always tell who founded a particular city or village or town. Where are the churches located? So if you go to some towns and right on Main Street, which is Main Street, if the Protestant churches are located there, that town was founded by the Protestants. If a Catholic church is on Main Street, they were founded by Catholic. But if you look at a lot of the villages, even here in Western New York, the Catholic churches are on back streets because it was predominantly a Protestant church.
What difference did Vatican II make then?
It made a tremendous difference. There were two special documents, one on ecumenism, which was about the relationships between Christian churches and how we need to try to put aside some of our divisions. The second was a document called Nostra Aetate that had to do with interreligious affairs. And with a growing population here in the United States and around the world, people migrating, said we need to have good, healthy relationships with people who are other than Christians. I use this phrase "other than Christians"
Right.
because most people say non-Christians.
Correct.
It's like the haves and the have-nots. So
Right.
I try to use "other than Christians"
And
to
it covers
make
a
them
number of
feel a
different
part
religious
of the
traditions.
community.
Well, the Catholic Church in Rome has had a number of side dialogues with individual denominations.
Correct. They have it. There is an active commission right now with the Anglican or the Episcopal Church. In fact, our previous Episcopal Bishop Franklin,
Right.
he was part of that commission at the Vatican for over 15 years for the Catholic
he lived
Anglican.
there.
Yep, he lived there. His wife actually taught also in Rome, so he was very much into the movement and up to his current time with Catholic and Episcopal or Anglican relationships.
Well, as we come to the end of our time, I want to talk a little bit about the difference between ecumenical and interfaith.
Yeah, ecumenical, of course, is relationships between Christian churches, all Christian churches. And interreligious is relationships with those who are other than. And those relationships have grown tremendously here in Western New York with the Muslims, with the Hindu community, the Baha'i, etc. I remember every one of those coming and seeking to be a part of the multi-religious group here in Buffalo. I went to the first meeting with the Hindus when they gathered. They gathered in someone's home, and that's where they worshiped.
Well, ecumenical really focuses on reconciliation and hoping that we could become one.
Correct.
That's not the same end of interreligious work.
No, interreligious, of course, is number one, understanding of who the other is, and trying to get a proper understanding of them. And sometimes that becomes difficult for our people because they're encountering a religion that they know very little about. And I would even use the word of acceptance of what they have to offer, because many of them have positive elements of their faith.
And particularly respect.
Particularly
Learning to respect the diversity. Thank you very much for this conversation, Father Francis X. Mazur, better known as Butch, Ecumenical Officer for the Diocese of Buffalo. Thanks, Butch.
Glad to join you today.